Do you want to be a hacker? You know, a hacker is a term you're going to be hearing a lot in this career, and it has sort of two meanings. There's the classic meaning, which I prefer, and then there's the more modern meaning, largely created by the media, which picks up on all the negative stuff and sensationalizes it, right? So the media has sort of perverted the meaning of the word hacker. It originally meant people who enjoy exploring systems and solving puzzles and coming up with creative solutions to problems. You know, you might say, I found a really cool hack for solving whatever it is. And that was the way the word hacker was used for a long time, up until computer intrusions and things started making headlines. And then, yes, the people who did these things were hackers in the traditional sense at the time, but they were only ever portrayed as being the kind of people who broke into computers. So it really gained a negative connotation in the popular vocabulary, which is really kind of unfortunate. I definitely prefer the classical definition of hacker. I consider myself a hacker in the classical sense, although you will rarely hear me go about proclaiming that, particularly in certain circles. I mean, anybody who goes around saying they're a hacker is viewed as possibly a bit of a poser, depending on the circumstances. I mean, did you see this scene in Spider Man, right? Where, what was it? Norman? Was that his name? Mr. Norman? I can't remember. The bad guy in Spider Man. What was his name? The Green Goblin. Right, he was the Green Goblin. Played by Willem Dafoe. Let's see. Norman Osborn. That's right, Mr. Osborn. Norman was the first name. Cool. So, yeah, he kind of became a bit of a meme because when he says, you know, I'm something of a hacker myself, he came off as a really pretentious poser. Nobody who actually had the kind of skills that he purported to have in the media, in the movie, to be able to do all these cool computer technological things would whatever say it that way. That was just kind of weird. But if we look, just for the word hacker in Google, the top result here, the question people ask, are hackers illegal? Because the negative connotation to the term, the negative definition is by far the most popular. And it goes into, unauthorized computer access and all that kind of stuff. Well, hacking in terms of breaking into computers you don't have authorization to access is certainly illegal. Hacking in the classical sense, as in writing a really cool program or solving a cool problem in a cool way, that is definitely not illegal. So it just kind of depends on the context and what you're doing and whose definition of the word we're using. And there's some other vocabulary around this whole area, which we will cover in a subsequent video. There's a lot of good information here. The Wikipedia page is actually pretty good. A hacker is a person skilled in information technology who uses their technical knowledge to achieve a goal or overcome an obstacle within a computerized system by non-standard means. Well, yeah, that's certainly one definition of hacker, and that is the more charitable, positive, classical definition. I like that. If you want to learn more about hacking or the history of hacking or where the word comes from, there are a few good resources, especially if you want to be in the cybersecurity business. I can strongly recommend a few things to pick up on the history and the culture of the business. And again, I'm not going to go into technical stuff, but just knowing about how some of these words came about, how some of the vocabulary came about, and just learning some of the vocabulary would be a very good thing. There's something called the Jargon File, maintained nowadays by Eric S. Raymond, who is a famous hacker in the positive sense. He's written lots of good software, done lots of good things for the open source software movement. I don't hear much about him lately. I don't know if he's kind of fallen out of favor, if he's just maintaining a low profile or what, but he maintains the Jargon File. which has lots of good old school computer terms and hacker slang and hacker culture and all that kind of stuff. Where did the word hacker come from? Right? What is hack? Why hack? Why that? There's some debate around that, but generally it seems to come from MIT and the Tech Model Railroad Club back in the 1950s. And this seems to be the most likely explanation of all the ones I've heard, and there really aren't very many. They were the people who liked to build the model train system and work on the signals and hook up all the relay logic for the switching and everything to kind of automate the process of operating their model railroad. And they would scrounge or steal or liberate or borrow or buy, I don't know, hardware from the phone system, for example, to get the relays and such to automate their train system. They would kind of build a little mechanical analog computer to make their train system work. Again, a model railroad. There was a model railroad club who did this. And there's a very good explanation of all of this in the classic book Hackers by Stephen Levy. I read this book when I was in high school. And this is an excellent book. Anybody who wants to be involved in information technology, computers, cybersecurity, needs to read this book. This tells you the origin of the word hackers and describes all the classic hackers, how they got their start, how they became famous, what their accomplishments were, a lot about the technology, the culture, the times in which all this stuff was happening. So again, that's Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution by Stephen Levy. So you can check that out right there. This is what a modern printing looks like. This is not the one I read years ago, but it's the one I picked up to reread a few years ago. Another great resource, if you want to hear a really cool hacking story, again, a bit old school, but this is, Hackers by Stephen Levy. This covers things like the Tech Model Railroad Club, the original MIT hackers, who kind of originated the whole term. It also covers Steve Wozniak and Bill Jobs, the Homebrew Computer Club, Bill Gates, Richard Stallman, all of the big names in computing up to, let's say, the early 90s, I think. It covers the original video game creators, Sierra Online, and all those guys. It's a lot of really cool stories about people's lives and how they changed the tech industry and made it what it is. It is not strictly entirely about cybersecurity. And that is sort of because cybersecurity came as an outgrowth of all the stuff these guys did, who made it possible to have all these computers and servers and networks and all this kind of stuff. But these were all hackers in the classical sense. Now, to read a story about hackers in the more modern sense, as in terms of breaking into computers, there is this book called The Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll. Cliff Stoll is a very interesting character. This is another book I read when I was in high school, but it still holds up. Both of these books hold up just as well today. They're kind of historical books, right? The facts haven't changed. So they're both very good stories. This is a true story about one of the first computer intrusions, or hacks, if you must. This happened around 1988, and the book came out 2-3 years later. And it is a very entertaining, true life story about one of the first computer intrusions that actually made headlines. And it really established Cliff Stoll's reputation, although he is famous for this book and this story. He's actually an astronomer and physicist, I think. Mostly astronomy, I'm not quite sure. I've not really followed his other professional work so much. But if you Google for him, actually, if you search for Cliff Stoll on YouTube, he is a very entertaining speaker, very energetic. He's not really involved in computer activities so much anymore. In fact, tracking that hacker through his institution's network was his kind of one and only big information technology, cybersecurity adventure, far as I can see. But it is a very good story and well worth reading. One of the things that got me into cybersecurity early on, before it was even called cybersecurity, that's actually a relatively new term. In fact, I think I might just do a video on the origin of that term and my feelings on it as well. But again, when I was in high school, and keep in mind, I graduated from high school in 1993. So that's like quite a ways back now, especially compared to most of you folks who are just coming up in the business now, or even just looking to get into the cybersecurity business. My first kind of computer security hacker book, and there weren't very many of them back then, was actually this one, Computer Viruses, a High-Tech Disease, by Ralph Berger, I believe it was. Yeah, Berger. This book, I don't think it's even in print anymore, and I don't even really recommend you pick this up and read it. This is just for example. This is how I got my start in understanding assembly language and how malware, viruses, and things like that worked. The way viruses worked back then, totally different than how they work now. You're not going to get much out of this book, but just to show you how I got my start, check this out. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but that is basic programming language code, or to implement a virus in the basic programming language. And I played around with this stuff on my own computer, of course. It was such a weak and useless virus that there was like no chance of it escaping or doing anything bad. And my computer wasn't networked back then. But yeah, that's how I got my start in learning how malware, viruses worked. And then as you go through the book, you get into things like this. That is assembly language, source code listing for a slightly more capable virus. Back on DOS-powered PCs, assembly language was really the way to go to make anything useful happen, especially when it came to malware. And so this was my introduction into hacking in the negative sense, I suppose. Although, again, I never did anything illegal or spread viruses or anything. But it's important to understand how these things work if you're going to defend against them. So that was a lot of my motivation there. Then my next book was this one, The Little Black Book of Computer Viruses. This was published like independently, not through a big publishing house or anything. I expect the author just couldn't get enough interest in it to get a big publisher to pick it up. So it was self-published, I guess you would say nowadays. I saw an ad for it in a magazine or something somewhere. Again, we're talking somewhere between, I don't know, 90 to 93 time frame. And I had to no e-commerce then. I had to put a check in the mail and wait weeks for this thing to eventually arrive. And this is just, you're not going to be able to read this, but most likely this is just full of assembly language program listings that you would type in by hand in a text code editor, and then use your, I had like Microsoft Assembler and Borland's Turbo Assembler, I think. I don't remember which one I used more, but you assemble these things and run them and play with them and run them through the debugger and see what they did. So I actually typed in and played with these. Little did I know until, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, well after I played with The Little Black Book of Computer Viruses, I discovered years and years after its relevancy that author had released another book, The Giant Black Book of Computer Viruses. I got this mostly just to have the complete set. As far as I know, Mark Ludwig only produced these two, and this is even the second edition of the second book. So I never actually programmed any of these, because by the time I got this book, it was well after any of this information would have been relevant. But it was fun to read through and compare the state of the art between the two books. A somewhat more modern book, and again, there are a lot more modern books, not so much on how to write malware and viruses, because those things have become so prevalent that the general theory, and I don't necessarily agree with this, but the general theory is that they don't need to help people to write those things because there are already way too many out there. Back in the old days, it was more of a curiosity and things were different. And so you could actually find books on how to write viruses. Nowadays, there are still a lot of books on how to practice penetration testing or breaking into stuff. And one of them, for example, is the Web Application Hackers Handbook. If you want to learn how to test websites, how to break into websites, how to code them properly to avoid a lot of the common vulnerabilities, this is a good book. This is actually, I don't know when this was published. This one's actually rather old by now. I expect there's a new edition. But these are just some 4 examples, by the way. This is not a reading list or anything. This is just to give you an idea of where the word hacker came from, what it used to mean, what it means now. And there are some more terms and definitions relevant to this word and the industry that we will be exploring in another video shortly.